Welcome to KJ TV for your greatest news and programs. I'm glad you're here to listen to wonderful program coming to you. And please don't forget to subscribe or give us thumbs up. Thank you for watching. Good evening, viewers, and welcome to KJ TV. And in the studio, we have African Diaspora Youths who are going to have a lively discussion about the impact of Chinese investment in Africa. And in the studio, I have Jimmy Juna. You can raise up your hands so they can see your name. Yeah. Originally from the great country of Tanzania. Sorry for losing your president recently.
Thank you.
He lives in Chicago and works at Deloitte as mergers and acquisition department. Then we have Fafa Yakor. Fafa is from the great country of Ghana. Lives in Minneapolis. Works for Wells Fargo as Cooperative Trust Services. And another guest we have is Ezekiel Kofi Abusu from the great country of Togo. And he lives in Minneapolis, works as a financial advisor with the Canadian Pacific Railway. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, as a people, African youth in the diaspora, and with your knowledge, you may have a lot of information about our country. I mean, the African continent. In 2013, the government of China started an ambitious plan about the Belt and Road Initiative, which it wrote an ambitious plan to build major roads, railways, and other infrastructure in the world, specifically pointing towards Africa. And actually, on the recent sessional paper for African policy for China, they have specifically said that in their investment, they are saying that Chinese government encourages and supports Chinese enterprise, investment and business in Africa, and will continue to produce preferential loans and buyer credits to this end. So with all of this, it has come some other people who are not very happy with these Chinese loans. Now, one thing I want, what do you understand by this policy of investment in Africa by China? I will start with you, Ezekiel.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. In general, I think investment is a good thing. It helps capitalize on the future by promoting better health, better living condition of the population. But when it comes to Chinese investment in Africa, there's a lot of loopholes, downholes that should be looking into. I can summarize that in terms of agreement, the detail of agreement.
Okay.
In terms of the impact on direct impact on the population, and also indirect impact on the future generations. So that's how I can summarize, investment in Africa so far.
Thank you. Fafa, what do you say about
that? Thank you for having me as well. I think Ezekiel is largely right on what the Belt and Road Initiative means for Africa in general. from the perspective of China, they've basically built up huge capital surpluses over the last 2 or 3 decades, and they are looking for a means of deploying those capital resources in the world in a way that gives them economic and geopolitical advantage. So from their perspective, I don't believe that it is fundamentally about developing Africa, or altruistic in any way. It's really just a means of advancing their own interest, which is fine, right? There's no problem with countries trying to advance their own interests. But what that means for Africa is that we get an opportunity to have alternative sources of capital into our economies. And we are starving for capital, right? The fundamental problems in Africa, we have resources, we are resource heavy, but we don't have capital. And to a large extent, our Western partners have not been as forthcoming as the Chinese with providing capital, especially in recent years. So it's broadly positive, but some of the issues that Ezekiel mentioned those are the negative aspects that we have to manage to ensure that this relationship is beneficial and not recolonization as people have characterized it. So
okay, thank you, Jimmy.
Yep. Okay. Thanks again for having me as well. I think largely I concur with my previous other guests. Overall, Africa needed the investment. Africa needed the capital, which we don't have from our countries. One area that I may slightly disagree is whether the Western countries are not willing to provide the same capital. I think if you look back, I was looking at some statistics right before I joined. I think all up through 2013, largely all the major investments in Africa came from Western countries, US, Canada, and European countries. But I think right at 2013, that's when tables turned and China overtook the Western countries in terms of African investments. So we'll get into that in details. I think we all have points we want to discuss about whether really we don't have Western investments or whether Chinese investment has some things that we don't see. I think we'll get into that in details, but for now, for my introduction, I think I'll pause there.
Okay, that is very good. Now, a question: Do you think there is a term they have coined? They are saying that China's debt trap diplomacy. Is it a Western making, or that is really true that they are doing a debt trap policy? Fafa.
So I wouldn't use the term myself, debt trap diplomacy. It is true, obviously, that when you owe money to people, you can't buy the hand that feeds you, right? So by providing capital and funding the infrastructure development, there is diplomatic gains to China from that. But I don't think fundamentally that the Chinese are trying to trap Africans in, like some kind of conspiracy theory to trap Africans and purely to gain the diplomatic advantages from that. I think that the term debt trap diplomacy has been thrown about quite a bit in the West, and it's understandable because the West and China are in a kind of geopolitical struggle, right? And we have to be careful we have to understand what our interests are, what our strategy is, and not be drawn into what is essentially a geopolitical struggle between two large powers. And I think some of these concepts have come, they come from that place of competition between the West and China.
Okay. Ezekiel.
Well, I believe this Chinese investment can be seen as a debt trap diplomacy in terms of the long-term intergenerational payback that will be happening. If you take the term of the contract, some of these huge investment have a contract that taken over 30 years, 40 years, in where they put in a rider obligating the state or a certain business to have a stability as a condition to overlaying their businesses or their investment smoothly over a number of years. Okay. So if that's the case, in case you default or you breach any of those rider contracts, you are accumulating more debt by escalating the rate that they are having in the contract. So, and if this current generation didn't pay it off, it's capitalizing, or it's a future generation that will be paying off. And when the time is the money, and we see that in economics, when you get $1 today, it's not equal to $1 tomorrow. And generation in the future will be paying that is still. So that's why some people will believe that, you know, it's a diplomatic way to come to put the entire nation and country into debt. But actually, the analysis should not be in that way. So the question is, do we have any alternative? And what alternative Africans are trying to put out there to counter this? If we believe this is a diplomatic debt, you know. So today we can say that is helping Africans to better their standard of living, to better their condition in getting better and having a better life to be able to do business. So we are not going to focus on the negative aspect of the investment all the time, but we'll focus more into what are the conditions, the better condition that is bringing into our life that will bring in more business, bring in more opportunity. If I give the example, for instance, a road from, for instance, you know, Lome to down the village. 20 years ago, if there isn't a road there, a farmer can grow crop, but it will be difficult to bring that crop to Lome, to downtown. But with this better road, better construction, light, and better security, they could, you know, liquidate that good and also have a good fertilizer, and then recycle their crop, you know, harvest time 2-3 times before the season is over. So in that particular time, the investment of a Chinese in Africa is good. But the only hindering part come, for me, I believe, in negotiation part and the contracting part that we will elaborate later, you know, in our discussion.
Thank you. Jimmy?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree more with Ezekiel and maybe slightly disagree with Safa. Seems to be a pro-Chinese investment.
I'm a lone ranger, Jimmy. I'm a lone ranger out here.
I think for me, I do 100% agree that most of these investments are actually a debt trap, because if you read all the contracts, there's a fine print that transfers control of these investments or the collateral assets that were put to the Chinese governments or companies in case of default. That's why it becomes a trap. And I mean, we have seen this happening. I think some of the southern countries in Africa were having some issues. We have seen a country in East Asia where I think they transferred control of their port to the Chinese government. And I think in 10, 15 years from now, a lot of African countries will be transferring a lot of their assets, the control of their assets, to the Chinese government. I mean, some of the examples that I was looking at was one of the, I think there's a 4 billion Addis Ababa to Djibouti railway that ended up costing Ethiopia nearly a quarter of its 2016 budget. I think Kenya as well had this Chinese financed railway from Mombasa to Nairobi, which went way above the budget and is costing the country about 6% of its GDP. So long term, I don't think African countries may sustainably pay back the debt. To summarize, I mean, I think one thing about Ezekiel brought up about alternatives, whether Africa has alternative investments, I think some countries do and some countries don't. I think one of the issues or the advantages to a lot of African countries of Chinese investment is that these investments do not come with any strings attached. They do not come with any conditions. So you go to Uganda where you have a semi-dictator who has been in power, no democracy. Chinese will be like, we don't care, here's the money. You see, Western countries, they'll be like, well, before we give you the money, you need to have a democratic system. You need to have some basic human rights. So all these conditions make it really hard for African countries to get a lot of investments from Western countries. China's moral compass is different. For them, whether you are democratic, whether you are a dictator, whether you don't have human rights, they don't care. Here's the money. Here are the terms of the contracts. Let's get going. I think that's my take.
Okay, that's a very good analysis you guys have given about the debt trap. I know most of you are young. Maybe you were not born during the Cold War, so you may not understand. During the Cold War, that's when US was a superpower and Russia was a superpower. And what happened, even when the Western countries were trying to rule some countries in Africa, they didn't want, they could give them loans, because if they don't give them loans, they would go to Russia. But when Russia fall, which is called the end of the Cold War, that's when now the Western countries started giving conditions to Africa. That if we are going to give you the loan, you have to do this, you have to do this. And I think they have been having a monopoly until China came into the scene. Now, China has come, they don't give conditions like that. But what is happening is that their contracts are coming way exorbitant. Is it African leaders who are trying to get kickbacks, and because they don't care, they get that? So, or is China doing that? Because China seems to be playing the cards with the Africans leaders, because when they are in office, you know, the project, they will tell you it will cost this, but give us this amount of money so that the officials will take. So can we totally blame China for that? Or we also need to blame African countries for that? Ezekiel.
Well, I mean, every story have two sides. And I believe right away that we cannot blame Chinese totally for that, but we can blame them partially. The point is, I understand that every business want to capitalize, want to make a profit. So in China, for instance, they have this system that are dividing the foreign direct loan that they are doing to Africa, and either they have these institutions that are tied up with the government by the private loans. They are Zim Bank, they have the Railroad Corporation, they have Insurance Corporation, which in China and all Asian countries that are controlled by China, having those excess of their money of a retirement that they have from their employer that they need to put in economics to circulate to get a benefit back so that they can pay for their generation future. So they are using that excess to dump into African economy. So they are using that for their benefit. So here's the thing. Where the Chinese are being blamed, or I think they are asking too much, is that those private entities are coming. They are coming as government backup entity, which are requiring a lot from a government. Like, they are not coming entity to entity. They're coming entity to government. And they're taking a monopoly as a government in Africa. So, for instance, a railroad in Kenya is being monopolized by an entity in China. It's not been monopolized by Chinese government. No, it's been monopolized by a money pooled together by different businesses, that private businesses, equity businesses that are investing into there. But the problem is about the monopoly, how they are controlling it. And some of them will say, we will have the management, and you have obligation not to contract with any other competitor for certain years, 40 years, 30 years, and then you guarantee this stability, and then you will be obligated to get insurance from our own entity again. So they're getting double, charges for those things. But here's the thing, and that is the part that I don't really appreciate when it comes to dealing with a business in equal partnership with Africa. But in terms of a responsibility or already run for African, is that they're lacking to promote internal debt. They are lacking to give opportunity to internal businesses to pull them their equity fund so they can put together to do the exact same thing. And I can, through my research and reading, I heard that Magufuli did kind of the same thing by promoting internal investment through retirement funding and through business funding to be able to finance a project that was originally contracted with a Chinese to finance. So those are the things that needed to be done by African countries. And also, they should, since they have the resources, they have the opportunities, they should be the one standing up today to say that before you get access to my resources, these are the conditions you have to do. But it seems like they are lowering the standards, African countries lowering the standards and not giving an opportunity to African entities to come forward and negotiate with other countries' entities. I'll give an example of my company. I'm not standing here in the name of my company, but my company will not go to China and negotiate with the Chinese government directly. They will find a Chinese railroad company that they can partner with. Okay. Well, they can negotiate, they can do diplomacy with the government to facilitate that and guarantee the stability for them, but still, they have to be entity to entity. But, from the media, we don't see that in African country. And at the most of the time, they just branded those foreign investment as rainfall from heaven and very pure, and so that every effort that internal people are doing are not being considered. So those are the downfall that I can point out from Africa.
Yes, Fafa. Any comments?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, any comment?
Any comment? Yes. Yeah. So, to your original point, to your original question about the costs having increased, at least from what I have seen, it seems like the Chinese generally come in at a lower cost than our Western partners. I think it is well known that most of the contracts issued by the World Bank, I think more than 50% at my last check of the statistic, go to the Chinese because they are coming in at really low prices. Of course, that's a function of work environment. I'm not it's not an attempt to justify the maybe lower standards in work environment or labor laws or labor violations, but the consequence of all of that is that their prices normally come in lower. Also, Chinese loan terms tend to be very long term. I think Jimmy made that point. Yeah. But generally, that's considered positive, right? It's like when you, in America here, for example, you have a typical mortgage term that's like 30 years. And we think, most people think that's positive because your debt servicing is manageable. Versus at home in Ghana, for example, I know you generally have to pay some of those loans off within 5 years. And that makes it very, very difficult for most ordinary people to be able to afford a house. So you can extrapolate that to the context of an economy. It's I think most policy experts believe that it's preferable to have some of those longer term arrangements. I would say broadly though that I am not necessarily say pro-Chinese investment. Because I think I am kind of on the other side of my panelists, of my fellow panelists. I am just pro abundant, sustained investment in Africa. And I think that when we are, what are the sources of investment? You have internally generated capital. I think kind of what Ezekiel alluded to. If you could have properly functioning financial markets in Africa, that allows us to aggregate funding either through pensions, through savings. Then you can. That's basically what the United States does, right? Aggregate large-scale capital and deploy it within the economy. We don't have the systems, or our systems are still developing, and we haven't got to the point where we can raise large-scale capital. I mean, some of these infrastructure projects are $3-4 billion. How long will it take to get to the point where Ghana can go to its own equity markets and raise $3-4 billion? I don't think that's necessarily realistic in the short, even in the medium term, right? So we have to deal with the realities as we see it. Now, it's not a justification of our countries loading up on debt, but we should be able to look ourselves squarely in the face. We are also partners to these agreements, right? We are at the table. We are at the negotiating table. We are not like, I don't necessarily agree with this view of us being kind of sheep being led to the slaughterhouse. We have politicians we have to hold our politicians to account and make sure that they are doing things in our best interest. And if they are signing agreements that's committing us to unsustainable levels of debt, then we need to be able to hold them to account and ensure that doesn't happen. So that's the view. The view is that it's positive, but we need to take an upper hand in holding our leaders to account.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Jimmy.
Yep, I think I want to go back to the original question here, whether our leaders also have to be blamed, and I think that our leaders, for some reason, a lot of African leaders. I mean, we have over 50 countries in Africa with so many leaders, some with good understanding, some with not. But I think we do need to hold them accountable. I think one thing that was very disappointing to me was learning that the African Union headquarters was financed by the Chinese 100% for 200 million. Are we saying that Africa as a continent, we could not come together and raise 200 million to build our own headquarters? We had to rely on China. I mean, obviously it had some consequences. A few years later, I think they found out it was bugged and all that stuff. So that's one of the little things that I think about, like what's wrong with us, with Africans and African leaders, right? And then are African leaders thinking about themselves and their families, or do they really care about the future of Africa? Because if you look at most of these projects, like the good example is, and our host here can speak to Kenya since he's from Kenya, the Mombasa to Nairobi Railway, when those agreements were being signed, a lot of politicians got super rich out of those contracts. They knew it was coming, they bought land, they didn't care about anything. Really, they're all about self-serving mindset, other than like, I need Kenya, I need Africa to be better than I found it, which is the mindset of most of Americans. Like every American president, even normal Americans we work with, they always dream their children to live a better life than they did. They dream to live a country better than they found it. In Africa, on the contrary, we don't have that mindset. A lot of leaders will want to make sure their families are better, but they don't care about living their countries and continent better than they found it. And I think that's the biggest challenge. So I think our leaders have to be held accountable. They have to be serious about this, and if possible, throw them to jail. If you sign a contract that was not beneficial to the country and you are asked after you retire, like, hey, tell me why you thought this contract was good for the country, and you can't come up with that, I think you should be held accountable and go to jail sometimes. Maybe that will set up the discipline and the tone for future leaders to really evaluate each contract and determine whether it's better for the countries or it's just self-serving contract.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very insightful discussion. Now, one of the things we do right now after the pandemic, you see America passing a package relief, even the infrastructure relief that is supposed to spur the economy, create jobs, so that when they give contractors who are building roads, they will employ the local people. And then once you get money, that's how we spur the economy. But these contracts from China, when they come with their own employees, even sweepers, even those who are the drivers, they don't employ the local people. And yet most of our African youths are unemployed. What advice would you give the people signing the contract? Why would they bring even employees when we are supposed to build give jobs to our people? Fafa.
I think that's a more unfortunate aspect of the relationship with China. Some of the benefits don't trickle down quickly or even at all to the masses of Africa, especially like the unemployed people. But all of that comes down to negotiation. It comes down to the deal that we are signing. Now we have to also understand that this idea of if I fund you, if I fund your infrastructure, if I fund this project, my company will be the ones to work on the project. It's not new, right? This is not something that China invented 10 years ago and foisted on African countries. This is, in a large part, this is how other donors of capital have operated. We know when they pass bills in the US, for example, like the infrastructure bill you're talking about, if you are pushing 2.3 trillion into the economy, there are always riders like, only American firms can do X, only American companies can do such and such. So, I think Chinese are negotiating for their own interests, and we have to do the same. I don't think that it's a lost cause. I think there's probably a middle ground there somewhere, that can be negotiated that will provide benefit for us, benefit for our people, and the unemployed people, and also meet the whatever terms that the Chinese want. But the most unfortunate aspect of this, which is actually not to the benefit of China, they really should consider this, is that it leads to a very, very negative sentiment among local populations. 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Ethiopia, and they were working on a highway that the Chinese had funded. And contrary to like what we read in the media of all of these investments being such huge positives leading to huge economic growth in this country, in a country like Ethiopia, which has been in the news quite a bit for that. The local people did not necessarily share that sentiment, and I think it's largely because of what you are describing as the benefits don't seem to directly flow to them in their local economy. So,
thank you, Jimmy.
This is the point I was waiting patiently. I think you're right. I think some of the contracts, they clearly state that when we do this project, we shall probably utilize our people like 90% capacity, right? Whereby they bring in, like you said, drivers, they bring in even cooks, they bring in everybody to your country. Contrary to what was happening back in the 90s, I think I remember back when like Western companies would come to our countries, even like Canadian companies, when they come there and camp somewhere to build a road, actually they leave that town better economically than they actually found it, because they provide actually employment at a good rate. Like if it's a US company, they go there and really pay good wages. Like people who worked for these contractors came from America, from Japan. Even Japan actually was very fair. They literally like made good money. Now Chinese companies are known for torturing their workers, for paying really low wages even to the local people. They're known to be very meager in their money. These people live in containers. They don't even go stay in hotels to boost the economy. They like build the roads, then in the evening they sleep in the tents. That's how much that's the Chinese way of living. They really save every dime, right? So I think at the end of the day, our governments are the ones who need to, I go back to the governments and leaders, need to be strong and say, hey, if you're coming here, I'm paying you my money, right? Locally earned money through taxation, I'm paying you. I need you to want to bring probably experts, but everybody else should be locally sourced. Now, why are we not able to do that? It goes back to the fact that Chinese loans and investments come with no strings and no conditions. So you go to, like I keep in East Africa, think about Uganda, right? You have this guy who has been in power since 1980s, before we were born, and he's still there. And he's not a democratic person. So a lot of Western countries will not give him money to invest in his roads. He relies heavily on China, which doesn't have any attachments. And he has literally his hands are tied. That's the only source of capital. He has to sign the agreement, even if the company comes with its own workers. I think it all boils down to our leaders, and probably this group of youth and the diaspora who have seen more need to step up and do something to help the future of our continent.
Thank you. Ezekiel.
Yeah, I mean, my brothers and already laid out very clearly. At first, I will just say that the reason why the workers are not being treated as they should be in Africa in terms of this Chinese investment is clear. Is because first, our local government keep Chinese investment private or very secret, and every time it get known by the community they are engaged in, is like sudden news. And some of them will be like, why we don't want this here, we don't want that. So there isn't a public hearing, there isn't community engagement to have their input in it. So in that perspective, why I say that is because when there is a community hearing, public engagement, people will hear in advance that there's something coming, they can get a training for it. They can, so here is now, they can get a certain accommodation in terms of being skilled workers. These Chinese contractors have been coming in out of like suddenly, and they come in. We are looking for engineer in information and this. People are not ready. They are not trained. They don't have education system set up for that. And Chinese are bringing their own technology, their own thing in their languages to that contract. That is the downfall about this. That's why the African workers are not being included. So I think what needs to be done in terms of advice is first, in terms of the contract, getting public engagement in it. Second, when the contract is being drafted, the government should require the Chinese businesses to include their languages in that. For instance, you can have a railroad in Africa where the switch in the bus stop is written in Chinese. Come on. It should be in Swahili or English or something. And I mean, I would say 10 years ago in a stadium, a football soccer stadium in my country, everything is written in Chinese. And one of the times they were playing the soccer game, the light goes off. They have to call that Chinese guy come back on. So that's the one thing. That's so the language barrier. So the point I'm trying to make here is when the contract come in, they need to train the local people, so they become skilled worker. So once they are becoming skilled worker, that is considered in economy a transfer of a technology, a transfer of a human capital. You see, so that's what we need for Africa. We need transfer of human capital, not just a transfer of money. So they shouldn't come and bring their own small prisoners from China and then build the stuff and go. And then we will just be, African will be the people that will just enjoy. And if it broke down, okay, let's call them again to fix it. No. So once, like Jimmy said, once they come, they should have a positive impact also on the population by training them, by keeping them to be those people who will be keeping the project ongoing. Okay. You see, but then they're having this contract so that once even if you go, it's a Chinese that will still be running it for 30 years, 40 years, and then the population will just be a users. No. So that's what I'm trying to say about that. That's why we have those African countries are considered people are considered like unskilled workers, and they go there, they are being mistreated, and some of them are not having employment contracts. They get injured and they don't even get a medical, coverage unless those are smart or those are being advised by a certain hiring company that oversee a little bit of those for them. So those are the things that, as advice, I will give to the government or even the Chinese companies or Chinese government coming to implement that. They need to scale up their games. Otherwise it's not fair immediately for both the people that indigenous people that are living there and also in long run for their business. That's why sometimes they can do a good project like this, but the population does not buy into the project. Okay,
thank you very much. Actually, that's true. The Kenya Railway, the SGR, which was built by China, the instructions are in Chinese. And when they were asked to train the other people, they gave them manuals which are written in Chinese. Which is a good point, and you are the young people. Maybe one of you will one day become a president of his country. I don't know. Maybe Fafa, you become a president of Ghana. Jimmy,
most probably more likely Jimmy.
And you are going to inherit this debt. Your old men could have racked, and you have to pay because it's an obligation. Now, and as we say, something we said about why putting the collateral. But basically, and I know most of you guys, you understand about these contracts. Jimmy, you work in mergers and acquisitions. I know you are always looking even the fine line of contracts because when you are doing mergers.
Yeah.
Now, these collaterals, like now, SGR in Kenya, the collateral is the Mombasa port. In case Kenya defaults, China will have to take the Mombasa port. And already they have taken the Djibouti port. The port of Djibouti is already under Chinese hands because they failed to pay. Do you think these collaterals, putting collaterals and using collaterals, is something good in these contracts? Ezekiel?
Well, I mean, we have to understand what's the point of a collateral first. Like Fafa used to, say it in all his thing is, even they do it in the US here. If you're gonna go build a house or get a loan to build a house from scratch, my company, for instance, if you're trying to do it, they ask you for collateral. But the bank just trying to make sure that they can recoup their money in case you default.
Yeah.
So, but now, here is the people that we elected in a power. Either they come with empty-handed, and the African people guarantee them that the nation will be there forever and ever. That is already one cholesterol. Okay? And the nation, if you have a good institution, now a president seat, a good institution, it's like a U.S. government is going to be there even if Donald Trump is not there anymore. That is a big cholesterol already. So that's why, instead of seeing it as generational diplomacy debt, it should be generational diplomacy benefit.
Okay.
For if it's a good investment, because the future population will benefit from it. So instead of these companies requiring African to guarantee something that is lucrative for African today that they are getting from it, so that they can give them a little bit of money, that I think is not a good thing. So the reason why they're asking for that is because first they are seeing people who are negotiating at the negotiation table not credible. That's showing that you are not credible enough. I want something that is more credible that I can recoup my money back. So they should first build their own institution strong, motivated, empowered, and independent enough so that the investor will be going after them. I want to do it there as well because I know they are credible. They are, they can pay back their debt. I wanted to put it there. Instead of them going after the Chinese, and the Chinese will say, like, the small that you have that is good, give it to me in case you default, I'll take it back from you. It happened in Zambia. And it turned out that a couple of years ago in Zambia, even the Chinese are controlling the police. The police department. That's crazy. Because the default in their own contract they did. So I think it's not bad to have a cholesterol, but the giving 80%, 90%, it means that your own government, your own institution are now credible, and you should work on that first.
Okay.
That's what we need.
Jimmy.
Yeah, I think Ezekiel has said it better, and I don't think I can top that. But I would just want to say that this is where it comes into the wave of second colonization of Africa. I think, first of all, you look at the strategical collateral assets they choose. So a good example of Kenya, they built you a railway, but they want the collateral of a Mombasa port. Why don't you use the railway itself, the asset you built, as a collateral? You can take that back. You can collect revenues from the train fares and all that stuff and still recoup your money. But they want the strategic asset, which is the Mombasa port. So my first reaction there, how did Kenyan leaders sign such an agreement? Right? It's not a fair agreement to the Kenyan people. Same thing. So like now, obviously Kenya is already struggling to pay back the debt. Eventually, let's say they come back and take the Mombasa port. Then they control a lot of inlets to the Central Africa. Because that that port supplies to Uganda, goes all the way to Congo. Same thing that's happening in Zambia. Obviously, you mentioned where the Chinese people are wearing the African policeman uniforms and in the streets. It's really shameful. Obviously, they also, I think, they were either in the process of taking the airport or they took it. That I'm not very sure. But then, that's what I said in the beginning, 10, 15 years from now, we may have Africa that's not for Africans. And if we are not careful, and if our leaders are not careful, and if the youth or the people there who are physically on the ground and as in diaspora don't step up and hold their leaders accountable, we may literally lose Africa to the Chinese, and maybe again go into second wave of fighting for independence again. Fighting for economic independence. What our forefathers did, we may have to do it again in a few years. I think that's what I can say on top of what Ezekiel said, who I think he covered it.
Okay, Fafa, you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I do. So going back to Ezekiel's initial point, what is the point of a collateral, right? If you are raising debt of $4 billion, the point of the collateral is to ensure that you will pay the money back. And we also know that generally in agreements that involve collateral, your interest rates are lower, right? Because it's a safer arrangement for the lender, right? So, I think we have to be realistic about the context in which these agreements are signed. If you are looking for capital to develop and you go to someone who is capital heavy and you want them to give you their money, it's not obvious that you can do a $4 billion agreement without some kind of collateral. Now, that being said, we have a general problem, I think, of large amounts of debt on our books. Again, I may sound like a broken record, but this is not a new phenomenon. In the early 2000s, a lot of African countries went into the HIPC, which is the highly indebted and poor countries programs, to try to get some of their debt waived because the revenues were basically being choked out by debt servicing. This is before China came onto the scene, right? And interestingly, we have literally reversed some of those gains because we've just acquired more and more debt. I think there was the story of the Nigerian finance minister who negotiated a debt reversal of about $20 billion in 2006, which is around that time, which is again before China became very active on our continent. So being unable to service debt within the economy is not a China-specific problem. It's a very general problem about how we are thinking strategically about our macroeconomic environment. So, we need to solve that fundamental problem. going back specifically to the collateral, I think Jimmy is right in that you are taking a port as your collateral, but then again, it is partly because that port is important strategically to the Chinese, not because of the revenues that the port will generate, but because of its geopolitical strategic location, right? It's just downstream from the Suez Canal, and everybody knows that that's a very dicey area, right? So if you want to have it, why are all the powers trying to aggregate bases in Djibouti? It's a choke point in global, as we saw last week when the ship got stuck there, right?
Yeah,
it's a choke point in global trade. And so from my perspective, you can totally understand the Chinese. They are trying to build their geopolitical assets in a way that provides them some security, because their entire economy is based on trade, it's based on exports, So there are really, really fundamental problems to address in the Africa's economy. I know a lot of African countries have debt to GDP ratios of 70%, some of them as high as almost 100%. When you look at the breakdown of African budgets or even tax revenues between public sector employees and debt servicing, that chews up about 80 to 90% of the budget. So when you have a situation like this and you are negotiating a loan and with another party, I mean, it is not unreasonable for the party to require collateral from you. I mean, I don't know how else you would do this. It's like in the US here, that when when you are going to, nobody is going to borrow you $500,000 to buy a house without some kind of collateral. I mean, this is how the environment is with finance, and I think we have to just come to terms with that fact and figure out ways to use the financial system to our benefit. We have to also remember that it's not that easy for African countries to get capital. I mean, I think that maybe this is part of what is probably getting lost in this conversation. It's not actually that easy for us to get capital. African countries, when they go to the Eurobond markets, are borrowing at rates of 12-13% in those markets. I mean, this is unsustainable. A year or two ago, I think Zimbabwe was looking for a $1 million loan, $1 million, and they couldn't get. They were denied. So we are dealing with specific market realities, and we have to come to terms with that. Now, to your point about suggestions or what will be the advice, because I've kind of laid out the problem. So what will be the potential approach? We need more integrated coordination of African countries. I think we just recently signed the African Free Trade Area, so that's a positive. And if we can kind of unify some of our approach, we can negotiate together. I mean, there are issues there, obviously, with being aligned strategically, depending on where each individual country is. But if we can come to some kind of framework, that gives us higher leverage. Right now, we have no leverage, and we are paying the price in the market.
Okay, thank you very much. Not everything is lost in Africa, because Sierra Leone cancelled in 2018 318 million proposed Mamama Airport outside its capital, Freetown, after such deliberation and consideration. The president said it's uneconomical to proceed with construction because they were not even, the existing one was still underutilized. Kenya also cancelled a 2 billion ram coal-fired plant to be built by Chinese. And Gambia also cancelled the fish meal factory in Gambia. So some governments have come up to find that some of the projects are unattainable. And another one is Bagamoyo Port in Tanzania, whereby the conditions given there, they were horrible. and the late President John Magufuli cancelled it. So do you think other government should require to review the contracts, and if it's not correct, they can open a renegotiation or cancel them? Zakia.
Well, as a sovereign country, they should be able to, every time, recall any contract that is against their citizens. If they any agreement that are signed that they believe does not align with the belief of their citizens, because their citizens endowed them with that power. That's what their citizens. But if you sign a contract and it is the same institution that is coming back, I don't think they give you a good credibility. You give it an example of Sierra Leone, I think that came after a change of power.
Okay.
And the new government have a responsibility to do audit and control. In audit and control, they have that power to say, hey, hold on, something is going on here. And they can do that. In some African country, let's give an example to Uganda, Togo, Central Africa, where the government is still there with their own bubble, their own things, which has those, small project financed by Chinese that we know they don't really care about any condition before they did it. It will be difficult to say that, yes, those countries also should go back and recall. So what should be, done first is to review or go back and strengthen that institution so that they have a new institution that regenerate, rebrand the government, I would say, rebrand the institution so that they can recall some of the agreement that were not aligned very well with the belief of their own country.
Thank you.
That would be one of the points.
Okay, Jimmy, you have something to add?
Yeah, and nothing much. I think Ezekiel raised up a really important point that some of the changes happen because there was a change in regime. And same thing, I think the Bagamoyo port that you referred to, really it was approved by the Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete's regime leadership, right? But once Magufuli came into power, he rescinded that agreement and cancelled it. If you don't have those opportunities where there's a change in leadership, with new visions, new strategic ideas that can come and change these past mistakes, then you don't have an opportunity to do that. Maybe that's the good thing of democracy, which countries like Uganda, even Rwanda, are missing, because you have the same guy since 1980s. I know we're running out of power. Maybe another thing then we need, running out of time, sorry. I think one thing that we need to think, that I've been thinking, is why are we even sitting here talking about the impact of Chinese investment to Africa, and our construction projects, we rely on them, they come in with their people. Why can't Africa use its own local labor resources, its growing youth population, to build these roads? Countries like South Korea, Singapore, even China itself, they did not go outside their countries to import labor and technology to build their infrastructure. When something happens in the US, they use their people to build this. I think in Africa, a time needs to come where we build our own resources. We have great universities producing great engineers every year. Why can't we use our engineers to build our roads? Why can't we do that? Why do we have to rely on other countries? That to be a discussion for another time.
That's a good topic, yeah.
Yeah.
Alpha, you have any comment on that? I know you are exhausted.
no, that's fine. So on the question of whether we should be able to cancel agreements, absolutely. I mean, as Ezekiel said, as a sovereign country, you should be able to cancel agreements. The thing though is to consider what the consequences of that are, right? Because as I said, it's already very difficult for Africans to gain capital in the market. We are borrowing at very expensive rates. Now, if we have the reputation for not necessarily following through with agreements, that just increases your risk profile, right? I mean, realistically, what happens is your risk profile goes up and your ability to, your cost of borrowing will also go up. So the more important thing is to get the agreement right the first time and not be subject to the political whims of the country. And, you know, that's probably the best case. But if you have a very lopsided agreement, which is just ridiculous, I mean, I think you have to pull the trigger on that one, you know. The problem here, partly, is that as we've talked about our leaders quite a bit and the politicians in Africa quite a bit. This is the locus of the problem, because lots of times our leaders go for these loans and they can show that, okay, look, we built this standard gauge railway or we built this bridge, right? But the most of our population is not necessarily aware of all of the additional debt that comes with it. You know, going back to the transparency point, they're not aware of that, but they can see the railway. You can go and campaign. When you're campaigning, you say, well, look, I built a highway, and on the basis of that, you should re-elect me. So it's like there are perverse incentives here. All of African leaders are very incentivized to go down this path because that is more likely to lead to re-election. And then that leads to very negative or lopsided agreements, and which then, you know, maybe a new government comes. I mean, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they are doing this, in good faith and not purely as a political maneuver, because that will be very unfortunate, right? I mean, if you cancel an agreement purely as a political maneuver, what you have done is increase the cost of borrowing for your country for the long term. So we need to think about this and all of the downstream impacts. One of the ways that could potentially help this situation is to use some of our non-partisan entities in our countries. So like in Ghana, for example, I think we have a Council of State or Council of Elders, which is kind of the statesmen of the country. And they don't necessarily have any political power. They kind of exist in an advisory category. But these are the most eminent Ghanaians, right? And I suspect that there are similar structures in Kenya or Tanzania or Togo and other places. So it may be helpful to bring some of those people in and give them some power. I mean, the politics is difficult, but you know, we have universities and we have great political scientists, and they can think up some structure that works to ensure that we don't have perverse incentives. When a politician goes to get a loan, it's not merely so they can win the next election in the coming cycle.
Okay. Well, our time is running, and I thought we were to cover the role of diaspora youth in Africa development, but I think we will have to do it another time. I could see you were really equipped with knowledge, and we will have to stop here because our time is gone. But before we finish, I would like to give each of you 1 minute to give your closing remarks and any advice you can give to Africa about these investments. So then we'll start with Jimmy.
All right, thanks for this opportunity and thanks for having us. I think I can say, as my closing remarks, that all across Africa, new tracks are being laid, highways built, ports deepened, commercial contracts signed, all on an unprecedented scale and led by China, whose appetite for commodities seems insatiable. Do China's grand designs promise the transformation at last, or a star-crossed continent, or merely its exploitation? That is yet to be known, and probably not in our lifetime, but hopefully it's a transformation of African continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Ezekiel.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I will start by saying that Africa is a sovereign country. As Africa has a lot of sovereign country, I would like to encourage them to come together to eliminate physical borders. We are okay to have virtual borders where when anybody crossing, they can do their own background, custom things, but to eliminate physical borders so the individuals, people can move, business can move around free. When we are talking about investment, we are talking about the road that crosses from Togo to Ghana. We are talking about road that go from Togo all the way to Kenya. And So when we are talking about investment, we are talking about telephone tower that is in Togo, but we can call Kenya, we can call Zambia. And we encourage them to review the agreement for that, not for the benefit of the individual, but for the benefit of the population, so that people can feel included, integrated, and you feel empowered. And the little that African people are put into it, they should put a highlight on that too. Not just because the population is giving the land, they're giving the resources, they're even workers, but that is not framed in every story. And they're just saying Chinese investment, because they have $1 billion. $1 billion come with a lot of work before they get implemented. So therefore, I will call our African government to not put a lot of emphasis on political figures. They should have a structure like Metropolitan Council that has the major power to review this kind of agreement, because those are institutions that will stay forever, and a political person can come and go next year. But like Metropolitan Council of Kenya, Metropolitan Council of Nairobi, Metropolitan Council of Lomé, Metropolitan Council of Accra, coming together to negotiate together, to have agreement that come together, and one as a one that will have united Africa. So, I mean, I'm empowering them to go and to have this unionized unity that could be seen by Chinese as a one person, and so that when the negotiation coming in, we are not individuals, so that they can, use reputational game to say that, hey, if you are not going to do it here, I'm bringing it to Botswana. Anyway, it's my money. So if they are coming as a one, it's the same agreement. I mean, the money that is coming, they will beg for us, but at the same time, our resources will be managed properly. So I will encourage everybody not, to look at the, Chinese investment as a negative aspect thing, but to work toward making it better. And also for Chinese people, when they are getting each individual workers, to transfer the technology to them, to transfer them a knowledge, not just to come and build and come and do things where they can still continue to manage the small light that is broken in.
Thank you. Fafa.
Thank you as well. Thank you for the opportunity to engage on this topic, very important topic. I am largely optimistic about the relationship with China, Africa's relationship with China. I think that it is only to our benefit that there is an alternative to secure capital. In any market scenario, if you are selling something and you have more customers, it just increases your price in the market. So having the alternative for China, let's pick the best. It's not an either or scenario, right? It's a what does London have to offer, and what does Beijing have to offer, and we can navigate that properly and choose what is right for our own people. The key point is to have some system of checks and balances, some system of controls to ensure that our current political leaders are not mortgaging our future as the youth of the country, so that we don't wake up, and realize Jimmy's worst fears, of losing our continent. But again, the blame squarely lies on our leaders, and we cannot sit here and rely on the goodwill or the sterling character of our leaders. We need to set up systems and structures that ensure that when our leaders sign an agreement, they are signing it in our best interest. In closing, I would say, the rise of China, has always been very positive for developing countries. This view of China as a debt monster is very new. If you look back at the stories around the rise of China over the last 40, 50 years, I mean, we all celebrated the rise of China because I think in a way it kind of signified that perhaps Africa too can rise in 3 or 4 decades. We don't have to wait for two centuries to become developed countries. you know, and they had kind of laid out this model of infrastructure heavy development, which perhaps we could also copy and rise as a people. So I think it is in everyone's interest here, the Chinese as well as the Africans, knowing our historic ties with China, which go way back to the 60s, knowing all of that relationship, Afro-Asiatic alliances and solidarity, that we can come together and make this relationship work for their benefit and ultimately for our benefit as well. So
thank you very much, gentlemen. I have really appreciated for you taking time, and you have shared your wisdom and your knowledge. I see you are people who have deep understanding on this topic, and also your love for Africa. So we will adjourn here, but the next week, Saturday, we will have another topic, the same interviewers on the role of diaspora youth in the development of Africa. So I really appreciate that you have been around, and may God bless you.
Amen.
Welcome to KJTV for your greatest news and programs. I'm glad you're here to listen to wonderful program coming to you. And please don't forget to subscribe or give us a thumbs up. Thank you for watching.